Thank you for having me. I mean, it's really a pleasure to be here and talk about my experience or my role and help in whatever way I can. So I am currently working as a senior product manager at Oracle out of their Bangalore office, and so I started out uh, my career in IT services as a systems engineer. So my role, I mean, I was basically involved in managing IT infrastructure and applications for our clients, and the role involved maintenance and customization of assets and software that we were owning for our clients. From there, I moved into an analytics consulting role at SAP, and what really worked for me and what I took away from that stint was basically reusable sort of toolkits and frameworks for analyzing data sources uh, in business contexts, and essentially creating pipelines of information that are ingesting or that are consuming this operational data from business operations and enabling business users of different varieties and different LOBs to essentially view and consume those data through actionable insights. Now, these insights would be either something that the our SAP software is providing, or the software is enabling end users to basically slice and dice or manipulate or massage this data to come out with actionable insights. So essentially, this is where I was doing a lot of hands-on data analysis and selling the value prop for SAP products to our customers. And I was essentially a power user for the kind of products uh, that I was responsible for. So essentially, this was sort of a platform for me to move into a formal product management role. And within SAP, I moved into an internal product team that was essentially owning a business analytics platform used internally at SAP. And what our platform did, it was the platform's name was Value Lifecycle Manager. It's an open to all accessible platform, but it was primarily intended towards SAP users and SAP customers. And what our platform did was essentially enable financial analysis through performance benchmarking. And without getting into nitty gritties of what the product was and how it did what it did, um, I was essentially involved in, and basically I ended up doing wireframing, user experience, database design, data modeling, road mapping for the product, understanding what works, what doesn't work, what is the most optimal way of uh, letting our users do something that they want to do. So this was basically the conceptualization phase, and uh, key deliverables and actions that we took out from this phase eventually went into development, product launch, eventually into a phase like product operations, where the product is running optimally on a day-to-day basis. And we, as part of the product team, are basically monitoring the product's performance, users' feedback through things like activity logs or product instrumentation as such. And we are involved in activities like enablement and feeding back those insights back into, let's say, top of the funnel, um, where a lot of inputs to product strategy and product direction go. So that's where I formally entered a product management role. And from there, I moved into where I am right now at Oracle in Bangalore. And so here I'm part of the Oracle Financials Cloud team. And if you're not really aware of what the product does, because it's primarily a B2B facing product. So our customers are essentially businesses, and our product is aimed to enable the order to cash cycle business processes. So what the order to cash cycle process is, our customers are essentially accepting orders from their customers, and there's this entire sequence of business processes that get triggered. So things like order receipt, credit authorization, order entry, production planning of these products, invoicing, payments, payment receipts, and then eventually into receivables management, or hopefully not into a collections phase. So I'm pretty sure you yourself have experienced this in some way or not. I mean, since we are having this conversation, if you look at telecom scenario where you pay your monthly bills, uh, the moment you get your bill is the customer invoicing phase, where an Airtel or a Geo is sending you your bill, and you pay the bill, and things are hunky dory from there. So prior to this, prior to you getting your invoice, you've essentially received services from a Geo or an Airtel, and they've essentially had this entire planning phase where they've planned out services and resources for you to consume as their customer. They've onboarded you as a customer into their network, and they've essentially had some level of credit checks to check if Aroopam or Harshil is good enough for this credit limit. So that's typically a very high level nutshell of how the order to cash cycle works. And our product is essentially helping customers like Geo or Airtel and Telecom and this whole other host of industries to orchestrate and execute this order to cash cycle for their own customers. So yeah, that's my summary of so far as to where I started from to where I am right now.
As you said, you moved from infrastructure to to analysis and then to product management. So what are the challenges that you have faced?
So I mean, from what I've seen and experienced, this role of a product manager has not really been a traditional kind of role, at least in the Indian market or the Indian context. If you look at something like consulting or a development role, that's fairly well defined, it's fairly well established. So naturally, in a situation like this, when a role is fairly new and its sources of entry are not really well defined, you have people coming in from all sorts of different backgrounds, and due to that very fact, each has their own set of skills and experiences and their strengths that you can leverage or fine tune or tailor to a product role. And along with the strengths that you built over your previous experiences, there are definitely those areas or those blind spots which for no fault of your own, tend to get ignored. It's like when you don't actively work on something, it tends to atrophy and grow weak. So naturally, when you find yourself eventually in a product role, there you have to be that much more aware of what you know, number one, but more importantly what you don't know, or what can be your blind spots. So if I were to say or list out, let's say, a couple of challenges that I've at least come across, is that a B2B sort of a product role, especially in a B2B context, tends to be like a more generalist profile, in the sense that there's so many aspects of the entire product lifecycle that have to be uh, you know handled or guided, and typically there are not enough hands to, or there are not enough headcount to essentially uh, execute those phases in as optimally or as ideally as one would prefer. So you're involved in everything from wireframing to working with developers to interacting with customers, and doing the not so glamorous parts, such as testing your own product, or trying to see what gaps are really there in the product, and portraying that or conveying that to other stakeholders in your organization. So I typically look at it like there's these different phases or different seasons in an entire life cycle, and depending on what time or what phase of the life cycle you're in, you're either explaining the big picture to upper management, or you're really going into the granular level details of how your product is working with a customer or your internal development team. So it's kind of a generalist profile in the sense that you're never sure or you can't really say that, hey, last week I was doing this, so I can expect to be doing something on these lines 3 weeks from now. So depending on what part of the life cycle you're in, your responsibilities or your deliverables change. So that's number one. Number two is, in a product role, you would typically inherit a product, and so essentially the onus is on you to essentially get down to details of the product, get down to get really hands on in the kind of use cases and scenarios that your product is enabling. So that need for a learning mindset or a continuous learning mindset is that much more important. And if you look at, I mean, if I take a look at my own experience, I moved from infrastructure to data analytics to product in a couple of different domains, and in none of those scenarios did I ever uh, you know work or enter the role from ground zero. There was always a backlog of items, so to say, to learn and pick up and become the expert on. And in my current role, that probably still is a work in progress. But still, there's some sort of entry point or a foundation which you hope to have, but there's this continuous need to always build on that. So that learning mindset is probably number two, which I would say. And I mean, the the most important part, I would say, is having empathy for an end user who would use the product. So that's a continuous challenge, because again, depending on the kind of product that you inherit, its its users are coming from different backgrounds and they have different motivations and needs that is driving them to use your product. So you really have to put yourself in their shoes to understand what would really work for them or what would not, and what is really the optimal way to deliver a feature or any sort of solution to them. So yeah, I mean, if I were to put it in another way, you really have to shift your gears depending on who you're talking to. So that's a constant challenge. And uh, in more traditional or defined roles, at least the last part of having to focus or put yourself in someone else's shoes, I would say does not happen to that large of an extent, because in my own experience as someone managing IT infrastructure, you always know what you're working with, and you know the kind of people who will come to you. So there's probably a constant factor over there. And in an analytics role, you are, let's say, familiar with your own product, your boundaries, and your envelope of experience that you are comfortable with, and the kind of insights or how you want to present your insights uh, is fairly structured. I mean, depending on the kind of engagement that you're in. But at least my experience, I said, has been that in a product role that tends to fluctuate slightly more, and that's something which I did not probably I wasn't that aware of, or I didn't really know what how that would transpire for me in terms of day to day sort of roles and responsibilities. Yeah.
Well, it's really good to hear that. But there's one thing that I always wanted to understand.
Yeah.
From my perspective as a UX designer, right? UX
Hmm.
designer or as a UI, I mean, like anyone into development, we have to work on multiple domains, no matter what we how much knowledge we have. I mean, like anything
Hmm.
that comes up, whether it's from BFSI or from from healthcare or from life sciences. So if I look at your journey, and you were moving from infrastructure to analytics and then to some domain, right, value
Hmm.
cycle, life cycle management, and then to Oracle's financial. So how
Hmm.
was your shift to those domains? So
Hmm.
you had, I mean, like if you look at SAP also has a lot of online courses on various uh, domains that they have. But how did
Hmm.
you move from infrastructure and then to analytics? Did analytics help you to get into the domain expertise? You say that learning is something which is very essential, but at the same time to get into the domain.
Yeah. If you are to basically look at two essential criteria, or I mean, One is, let's say, domain expertise, and the other is role-specific expertise. And these are generic terms. You can apply them to a product management context, or a development context, or any a consulting context. It's always about, do you have, let's say, the job-specific skills, be it consulting or product management or UX design, and do you have domain experience. Now, and you know on these two dimensions, you can look at it as a 2 by 2 matrix. You're either a yes on both domain and role expertise, or that's the best case. And the worst case is you don't have domain experience, and you don't have industry experience, or role experience, which is basically not really applicable. It tends to be more applicable for freshers who are just joining the industry. So typically, having someone have both domain expert experience as well as role experience is like a win-win situation for an organization, and that's probably a minority in the kind of context that we are talking about. And at least I was in, I had at various points of time 1 out of 2 skills. And if I were to talk about, so my analytics consulting experience was essentially very formative, in the sense that it gave me, how do I put it? It essentially gave me the domain experience as far as analytics goes, and that is something I was able to leverage while moving into a product management role. Because the product within SAP was essentially focused on business analytics, and so that's how I had that element of domain experience, and I was able to use it to sort of get a foot into the door, and basically learn or see how really product management works, and build on those skills. Something else which helped me from that analytics experience was essentially working with clients in different industries, and essentially so that experience I was able to leverage, or helped me understand how these financial processes work, what are different sub processes, how do things like payments work, how do things like retail banking, or you know real time marketing promotions work. So that's something which I got experience during my analytics stint, and I really wasn't aware at that point of time that this is something uh,
Mhm.
I can probably extend in the future. But that's how these things really worked for me. So if you want to really try and understand where you are at this point of time, and what you can really leverage or not, this is probably a straightforward way to look at it. That what are I mean, how much of in role specific experience or expertise do you have at this point of time? Let's say, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5? And what kind of domains have you worked on? So this would naturally be a wide
Mhm.
uh, list, given your extensive experience. So naturally, you will not be an expert on any one specific domain into great level of detail, but you would be able to extrapolate situations and specifics that you've seen or you've worked on, and extend them into the future or into an unknown space. So again, yeah, that's something which has worked for me in the past. And yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Now, if I, in the same, if I look at myself, and if I look at the career that I have, the experience that I have, and if I look at myself as, being a UX designer.
Hmm.
So some of the things that you have mentioned, like wireframing, and prototyping, and understanding requirements, and understanding what are the user needs. These are some of the things that I also do, and I'm
Hmm.
also part of, these are part of user research. So these are roles which I see very similar to, the role of a product manager. So these are some of the things
Correct.
that product managers do.
Correct.
Now, if tomorrow, it's from my perspective, if tomorrow there's a requirement for a PM role or a product owner's role, and you would be the hiring manager for that, and if I
Hmm.
apply, right? So what kind of skill sets, what kind of knowledge, or what kind of roles that you look at my resume, if you want
Hmm.
to shortlist me, or if you would like to, if you think that, okay, I would like, I mean, like he doesn't fall into what I'm looking for.
Mhm.
Definitely, domain from domain perspective, I have worked on multiple domains. So, if you talk about licenses, I have understanding of life sciences, or as I said, purchase to pay is one more domain. Then insurance sector, there are products that I've worked on, but these are not not into SMEs, but not into expertise. But yes, while I worked, we understood the things. So how would you look at my, if I apply, how would you look at my resume? What kind of skill sets that you would look at me?
Okay, so I mean, typically what a hiring team would or where a hiring team would be coming from, and I'm sure you would have experience in this sort of aspect yourself of building out your teams, or contributing to additional headcount within your team. My experience has been that people on this sort of panel have a very specific agenda, that they want people who can contribute to the team as quickly as possible, who become assets to the team as quickly as possible with as minimal hand holding as possible, especially when you're hiring people from the industry. Now, how you would, or how you could leverage this to your experience, uh, is that when you're applying, or when you come across the specific opportunity within a product team, off the bat what where this product is aimed at, and who this product is essentially serving. So if you were to take a specific example of, let's say, the healthcare or procure to pay scenarios, in a procure to pay setting, you know who are going to be using this product. It's going to be, let's say, the payables department of an organization, and within payables organization there are these several stakeholders, or several sort of personas of people who are interacting with your product. So now, from your experience in user in UX, in UI design, in wireframing, what are several design considerations or design aspects which apply to these different personas, and you are able to make these trade-offs between design elements, saying that, hey, this is where, or this is how a particular user persona would probably be using my product, what
Mhm.
works for him, what doesn't work. You are able to convey that as far as the visuals of the product go, right? When you're building out wireframes or mockups. Now, if you are to extend this mockup in both directions, if you take it back to the system, basically, how does any interaction on this wireframe or a mockup interact with your backend system? What is your screen essentially transmitting and getting data from on the backend of a system? That's something you probably don't work on a day-to-day basis if you're focusing on the user interface or experience aspect. But like I said, in a product role, there are these several seasons depending on where your life cycle is. So at some point of time, a product manager, or you're talking to a product manager, and he is discussing these aspects of user interface and design with you. So you would be able to extract or identify where a certain screen is, or how a screen is interfacing with the backend system. And if you have to take this on the other side, you typically will have a good idea of where your individual screen is sitting on the several screens, or the inventory of screens that you have, and how does the interaction typically flow from one aspect of the product to another. So this is probably just starting point. You have experience on user interface, and you are able to probably tie it up, or look at the bigger picture when it comes to the larger product, or the bigger product, as far as user experience goes. How that screen, or how that part of the product is interacting with the backend systems is something that you can take as step number one. And again, now this is kind of a static insight, that my screen is sitting on top of this system. How the system was designed to be this way, or what were several considerations which were taken into discussion is the next step. Basically, from your experience, you would probably know. I mean, if you were to successfully extrapolate this aspect of taking a screen and going back into the system, you probably have you can see several systems at play, and what are differences into as far as how information is organized or information is processed in these systems. This would form the aspect of or this would form the basis for how these systems are designed, and what interfaces do these systems essentially enable. So that these are probably two steps that you can take into starting from where you are right now, and extending or foraying into that aspect of product management or product design.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting. That's quite something which I have faced also. I mean, like while we work on wireframes and prototypes,
Hmm.
we would like to relate it with how the system works. And it is always
Hmm.
important from from the technology perspective. Also, we see, although we are into only about creating the screens, I understood that understanding the technology also is very important because we need to understand how it is feasible. So these are very interesting things. Something which you have said earlier about something which is very another interesting thing for me, which I see in my product managers, building strategies and roadmaps and for their products. Now you have moved from, if I look at SAP, it's an on-premise software, and then you moved from a SaaS business model.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you're part of doing the strategy and roadmap, release plans and all, what is the differences that you generally see there, from an on-premise to SaaS business model?
So typically, a difference between the on-prem and cloud or SaaS products as far as end user experience goes, and this entire window of trying to lay out what you want and ending up with something that you can use. Um, so in let's say an on-prem scenario, my experience has been that people are are that much more involved or open to working with the product team and essentially conveying what is it that they're looking for. Now, if you were to take an analogy of this, um, you know, when in the entire house purchasing cycle, you are that much when it comes to interiors and interior design. There's so many options. There's so many aspects of customization that you want for your own house, and you're willing to work with contractors and people in this entire ecosystem to get what exactly you want and invite them and build it out for your house. And that's one way of looking at how requirements in this on-prem kind of scenario work, because the requirements or the customizations for a client are exactly that. They're extremely custom and specific, so they're that much open to working closely with the provider to get what they exactly want. Now, in when you move this model to a SaaS ecosystem, that that just stops because there's so many customers potentially, and if a product provider or a service provider starts to customize his offering for every single one of them, he's not going to be able to meet anything. And so that's where this aspect of getting standardized feature requirements or enabling standardized business processes comes from the product provider. And companies like SAP and Oracle say that, hey, we work with so many customers, and we we know what best practices are, and we've built them into our product. And if a new customer takes our product, he's essentially consuming all these best practices. Now, that's a very rosy picture. What tends to happen, or what hopefully does not tend to happen, what you will be able to avert successfully is pushing something into your product which essentially breaks what is working for a particular customer. And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. with, I mean, I know I experienced this last week. I was using Google Maps for my navigation, and I did not know a couple of days back I had updated something on my phone, which essentially broke navigation. Right. So now I'm on the road. I'm trying to, go to this new place, and I'm relying on Google Maps because it's always worked for me. But on this particular day, it just stops. I mean, it's showing me on one part of the town where clearly I'm somewhere else. So the experience for me was essentially broken. But I mean, Google Maps is essentially a B2C kind of scenario, so that's okay. I can't hold Google. I can't go back and hold Google Scholar saying that, what did you push? It's broken for me. But in a B2B setting, that's a very real thing, because in a B2B setting, you're not working with direct consumers like you would do in a B2C setting, but you're essentially working with these customers and organizations who you hope to have a good working relationship with. Because if you don't, when it comes to renewals, you're not going to get back their contract. So, it, I mean, whatever you're pushing into your product in a cloud or a SaaS setting, the onus is on you as a product manager to make sure that, whatever hundred thousands, 10,000 customers that are using your product, they their business processes are not adversely impacted.
Mhm.
And due to no malicious intent of yours. So that's kind of a difference in, let's say, an on-prem versus a SaaS setting. That you're not working as closely or as in a customized manner for your uh, for your for your clients or eventual users, but this responsibility to make sure that life goes on for them or it's business as usual for them is that much more important. So yeah. uh, uh, Tell me if that made sense from from these various experiences or angles. I'm sure you would have seen those play out in
Yes.
your own life.
Yes. No, it's interesting. Definitely, it was quite interesting to know because the biggest challenges that you have seen that we see is that whatever you bring in for SaaS, it shouldn't break for any other
Correct.
customers. That
Yeah.
is a very big challenge for any product managers, and that to be very careful in to understand requirements and it's have to be what this is something moving from from one area of expertise to another area. I'm coming back to something which we have already spoken, but what is the thing that have excited you a lot to get into
Hmm.
this product management role?
Um, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so I've predominantly worked, in the B2B, product setting, and so I mean, what what interests me, what I like about this role is, I mean, it's a couple of different things, and in no particular order. Let me try and walk you through those. So at least in a B2B setting, the kind of products I've worked with, uh, you know as far as the product's install base goes, or the scope of your influence as a product manager goes, it's huge. In B2B products, an SAP or an Oracle is selling its products to several organizations, and these organizations itself have their own user base, be it internal employees or their own customers, who are interacting directly with things that you are designing or you are shipping out. So in terms of the sphere of influence, uh, a- in a B2B product setting, that is huge. Any kind of work or any kind of enhancements that you push out into your product eventually get used by a large user base. So that's something which gives or is a source of immense satisfaction. Um, the second point, and it's sort of a continuation of the first point, um, in B2B products, depending on the size and scale of your product, you can be you can either have broad or wide expertise across the product portfolio, or within a specific part of the portfolio you can have deep expertise. And it's kind of a matrix where hopefully you hope to either achieve deep vertical expertise or wide horizontal expertise across the portfolio. So even with your specific area of expertise within the product organization, the kind of impact that it has for your users is huge, uh, primarily because of that multiplicative factor between your product being sold to organizations and organizations having their own different stakeholders and their own customers. So that's another aspect. If I talk about a couple of internal facing or inward facing aspects about a product role, um, it, at least for me, it ties up well with a sort of risk averse or risk averse mentality that I have, and I hope to translate that into my work in the sense that the work that I'm shipping out, I have to put that much more thought and effort into making sure that things don't break for my customers or my end users. And in a complex and a broad B2B product, there's so many combinations and there's so many sources of inputs that are possible that can end up into the system and result in an inconsistent state or may result in something breaking. So there's that much more thought and there's that much more thought that goes into potential sources or potential ways in which my area of ownership can not be behaving optimally. So that's these are, I mean, a couple of external facing and inward facing aspects which I sort of enjoy in my role in B2B products.
It is good. It was interesting to know that.
Yeah.
So, Harshit, it was good to talk to you.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of things that we have, we'll be taking from your experience
Hmm.
on the
Yeah.
various aspects that you have shared with us. Thank you for your time, and it's really good talking to you.
No problem, Arupam. Thank you for having me. I mean, it was my pleasure getting to know your experience and trying to share from my experience how you can explore or widen your own
Mhm.
uh, areas of experience. So yeah, thank you for having me.